Today we have a discussion with Michael Horn. He's the author of Choosing College: How to Make Better Learning Decisions Throughout Your Life.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. In this episode, we've got a great interview with Michael Horn. Again, he's the author of Choosing College: How to Make Better Learning Decisions Throughout Your Life. In this episode, we talk with Michael. He has a lot of research and a lot of great information about choosing majors and choosing careers and the statistics around why people don't finish college and what happens when they don't. So he's got a wealth of information to help families that are, again, struggling a little bit perhaps around why college and should we do college and what kind of questions should we consider as we work this out. Then stay tuned for Brad Recommends. I'm going to recommend a couple podcasts that fit well with what you learn, talk about gap years and other resources that might further you along on the process of choosing a major or choosing a college. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Michael. All right, so today I'm talking with Michael Horn. He's the author of Choosing College. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. You do a lot of research and writing and all kinds of interesting things around education, broad education, anything from K through 12 all the way through college. So you give a lot of insight, and I've been reading some of your stuff, and a lot of it rings true with what I see as well. So it's like you have the hardcore research to prove it, and I have the anecdotal evidence that goes along with it.
Hey, it turns out individual stories often tell you something that's actually happening on the ground more than the data does. So it's don't discount what you're saying.
Right. So obviously you have a book out there called Choosing College. And I think a lot of families, that I'm working with, again, are in the high school age and they're struggling with choosing college. And I think that means different things too, is like choosing which college, choosing to go to college at all, and comparing it to alternative paths. And so tell us a little bit about the basics of the book and what it's about and why we would want to read it.
Yeah. So in the book, we basically tried to break down both of those decisions and say we created 200 plus mini documentaries of students making the choice of whether and where to go to school, and then did a bunch of analysis on it to come up with these 5 basically core sets of reasons that people choose to attend college and help inform where they will go. And out of that, we try to give parents and students a way to find themselves. Which job am I, so to speak, in? Why am I hiring college, if you will? And to make better decisions accordingly, because some reasons to go to college are very likely to result in great success and make a heck of a lot of sense. And maybe some of that debt that you're scared about taking and investing in could be a really good investment. And some of the reasons we can predict ahead of time are far more likely to result in suboptimal outcomes, dropping out, transferring, things like that, where perhaps some of that debt that you might have taken on or that time you might have invested could have been better spent in some other pathways. And we try to give some ideas of what those pathways might be. And frankly, they might end up back in college at some point, but it might not be the right next step right away out of high school, depending on where you are.
Right, exactly. So that anecdotal evidence of people that drop out. And actually, in one of the articles I was reading, I actually grabbed this quote where it says, students who enroll in college because they felt it was expected of them ended up dropping out or transferring 74% of the time. Now you did, and then it says our research revealed. So obviously you studied that and came up with, that's a really high number.
Yeah, it was stunning. And just, in brief, it was basically, that was one of the clusters. There's a whole set of students who are very apathetic about whether they really want to go to college. They're just doing it because they feel like society expects me to do it. My parents expect me to do it. My peers, my teachers, my counselors, whatever it is. And they go and they're kind of listless. And so, as you said, 74% of the students dropped out or transferred. Well over half said it was a complete waste of time and money. And then we were able to do larger surveys, over thousands of people, tracking them and seeing this pattern just repeatedly play out, where they weren't really invested or convinced by the result. And, the reality is in this country, roughly 55 to 60% of students will graduate four-year college in 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 40+% who are not going to graduate a four-year college in 6-year time. And we know from the data, also speaking, a lot of this conversation about student debt can be overwrought because sometimes it's a great investment. But if you don't graduate and you have student debt, that's where you see a lot of the students not able to repay and a lot of the crippling stories that you read about in the paper.
Right. Absolutely. And I guess just to clarify again, another quote that fits right into this is you say essentially college is high stakes. We've always had the problem of choosing college and that kind of stuff. But our generation, and again, I'm quite a bit older than you, but I certainly remember being able to work in the summer and earn enough, and a small loan covered college. So I could literally in 10, 12 weeks earn enough to cover a big chunk of college. So that's the high stakes, I guess, is students are not earning $20,000, $40,000, $60,000 in a summer anymore. Or never were.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Never were. And college has just greatly outpaced any cost of living increases that we've seen, inflation, wage increases for median family in this country. And so, this conversation might not be that important if we were talking a generation ago where college was significantly less expensive, but it has become significantly more expensive. That's reality. It eats up a much bigger share of families' net wealth, families' net income from a given year. And as a result of that, it's a much higher stakes decision. And so, in the academia side, in colleges and universities, you'll hear a lot of professors or administrators complain. They'll say, why are they so interested on, will my kid get a good job on the other side of this? And you're like, well, if you didn't cost so much, then perhaps they wouldn't be as worried about it, but you do. So there's a practical reality to that as a result.
Absolutely. Yes. And again, that's why college is so expensive. There's many cases where it's worth it, and therefore people will buy it. And the short answer of why college is so expensive is because they raised the prices and you still came. And then they raised them again and you still came, right? Yeah. So why not raise prices? Now, and again, it's much more complicated than that with the aid and all that kind of stuff. But so that's the reality we live in. So college is expensive. So before we dive in more into the book, let me talk a little bit more about that side of it now. So because college is so much more expensive, is it worth it to spend more time, effort, and even money at the front end? Because I see these businesses popping up, and anecdotally, I think for the right situations. And again, they all have something, quote unquote, to sell. But if they're selling something you need, go ahead and buy it. The question is, do you need it, I guess? But as an example, consultants that will help you figure out what you want to be when you grow up. Is that worth $1,000 or $10,000 or $50 an hour?
Yeah, I think you got to be really careful with these services and really thoughtful about what are you trying to get out of? Like, what's the progress you're trying to make and what befits it? Like, if you're focusing on the financial side, you can get a service that's going to help you save a lot of money, see a lot of ways to structure your own income and holdings, and frankly, negotiations with schools that are going to make a heck of a lot of sense. If you're trying to figure out exactly what you want to do through a very simple and simplistic process for a 17 or 18-year-old that doesn't, quite frankly, have that much conviction or life experience to make that sort of a decision, maybe that doesn't make sense, right? And you should start to view not only the next few months and years, but also college as a set of series of experiments where your child is going to get experiences in a variety of fields intentionally to learn more about themselves and figure out, what am I good at? What am I not good at? What gives me energy? What drains me of energy? Oh, gee, is this actually a career I can have? And how do I interview people who maybe do this on a daily basis to see what's their life like? Is that something I could actually see myself doing? That's really important work. And I think high schools, frankly, should be helping students invest way more time in it. But don't just buy a service because you feel like, oh, my kid's got to have the major that clearly pays off in the job market and have absolute certainty. I'd be wary of rushing into that, thinking there's going to be a silver bullet way of shedding light on whether this is the right fit for you.
Right. Absolutely. I would say it's probably not a silver bullet, but statistically, if it increases your odds, it could be worth it. Understanding, though, again, that increasing your odds doesn't mean it's not going to fail. It just means it's less likely to fail. And I think that's the biggest challenge is most, maybe not most, and I don't know if there's any studies around this, but I think there's a lot of people in their lives that has a sharp left turn in their career path, as I'd like to say. And there's just no way to predict that. But most people, when you talk to them, say, but I needed to do what I did to realize I needed to make a sharp left turn. Or, what I learned is applicable. It's just a different way of looking at it or whatever it is. So most people don't regret it. It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in some cases.
Yeah, I agree. And look, there are some kids who know that they want to do X, and great, right? Power to them. Let them go for it. But it turns out, to your point, and there actually are some academic studies on this that David Epstein in the book Range and Todd Rose in the book Dark Horse write about, where they show that the people we think of as being the most successful tend to have this zigzagging behavior where they start out in something or meander for a while, trying out a bunch of different hats on, if you will, until they find themselves. And they absolutely believe that earlier life experience is important to who they become, but it's something that you have to have the reps in. You have to have the experience a lot of times for a lot of students. And so, look, I'm a firm believer that we could prototype and get those experiences earlier in people's lives and help them make better decisions quicker. But it's not going to be a shortcut through it to find my path that's sort of ironclad. I think as we live life, especially in today's society, we increasingly realize this isn't a race to a specific destination. It's an ambling pathway that each of us is going to carve out for ourselves.
Right, absolutely. So if we're talking about the book again, so you mentioned the 5 jobs to be done. So essentially what you're saying is if we're hiring college to do a job for us, in other words, if we're going to spend money on college and time and effort and all that other, that stress, et cetera, we're doing it because we expect an outcome, not because it sounds like something fun to do, so to speak. So what are the 5 outcomes? I think I wrote them down here. I don't quite understand them, and we'll go through them here in a minute. But so it's getting into their best school, do what is expected of them, get away, step it up, and extend themselves. So can you expand a little bit on some of those and what they're about?
Absolutely. I'll try to give the Cliff Note version for each of them. We can rip through them. So to help me get into my best school, if that sounds a little bit recursive or redundant on itself, it's because it is. It's a lot of high school students typically who are saying, it's all about getting into the best school for me as I define it. They have a sense that they want the classic college experience, the beautiful brick and mortar school, maybe the prestige as they define it and the trappings of it. But there's much less sense of like, why? Like, what will I do when I actually get there? Which, to be clear, is okay. Like 75% of something like that of declared science and engineering majors who go into college switch out of science and engineering, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who don't stay with what they think they'll do. Totally okay. But the point is that they're all about optimizing for the best for them as they sort of perceive the best in that moment. And they succeed. 83% or something like that, if my memory is correct from the book, have great outcomes in that. The help me do what's expected of me, we covered. Sort of the flip side, they also feel like it's the logical next step, but it's because someone else is pushing them. It's not because they're excited about it. The third one, get away. So these are students who really desperately want to get away from something right now. It's their hometown, their family life. Maybe they've taken a job. They graduated high school. They took a job for a year and they're like, this is miserable. I got to get out of here. But their time horizon is super short. It's all about escaping. And college becomes this thing that they can say that is safe from a social perspective with their friends, right? It's safe. They can say, oh, I'm going to college. And people say, oh, isn't that great? But they're all about just getting away. And the moment that they get away, they often realize, and we tell some stories in the book from some of these people, they arrive and they're immediately overwhelmed because like they didn't want 4 years and all the expense and all the things that they'll have to do to graduate. They were looking for just like something that got them away. And so part of the book is talking about if that's where your child is, how do you help them take a half step to get away and then figure out what's the bigger next step? The fourth one, help me step it up. Honestly, we heard this a lot in like more low-income communities and places where people were depending on them to sort of change the lives of them and their family trees in many cases, or older students who were going back to college. They were running away from something for sure, but it was more to lift people up and with like a high degree of certainty around the skills and the certifications and degree that they wanted to get that job. Right. Super deep understanding. And then the last group that helped me extend myself, honestly, not a lot of 18-year-olds fall into this group. This is more adult learners who sort of there for the love of learning and the challenge of the experience and things of that nature for something that they've always yearned to want to do. But it's a pretty low risk decision for these people. And so it's not super applicable. I can think of a couple exceptions of studies or people I've talked to, but for the most part, this isn't an 18-year-old job.
Right. All right. So obviously we mentioned that getting away, so using college as a way to get away tends to not be a good reason because it ends in a lot of angst and failure. Is that true of some of these others, or are the others a little more appropriate? And, how do we kind of figure that out?
Yeah,
am I doing the right thing, or am I doing something that's just asking for trouble?
Yeah. So my statement is twofold. If you're looking to do what's expected of you or to get away, going to a 4-year school that's going to cost a lot of money doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. You should do something else, take a gap year, take a job, something that's going to get you some experience, build some intrinsic desire to go to school and move into one of the other 3 jobs, get into my best school, step it up, or extend myself. Where those 3 have really good outcomes, well over 70% success rates for all 3 of them in our research. And I'll tell you one other thing. Some students, they started to help me get into my best school. They apply to that dream school. Maybe for some of your listeners, this just happened. And they didn't get in early, say, right? Mm-hmm. And then they apply to a whole laundry list of safety schools. And a bunch of them, they're actually not really excited about attending. And they get into those and they end up enrolling to really do what's expected of them now. Sort of they fall into the do what's expected of me. Mm-hmm. And so one of the big pieces of advice is don't rack up a bunch of safety schools for their own sake. Like pick safety schools or pick colleges that your child is genuinely excited about enrolling into. Don't do what my mom did to me when she sort of threatened, if you don't get in early to your school, I'm going to lock you in the room. You can't see your girlfriend and you're going to do applications to these 20 schools because I said you're going to do these applications to these 20 schools, half of which I had never been to, had never visited, didn't know anyone there, right? Like that's not the right attitude out of this. Pick schools that you're genuinely excited about.
Right. And I think another important fact that's really missed in the soundbite world and the quick lists on our phone and that type of thing is college and education is such a broad topic that one of the key pieces of the puzzle, I think, is who we're talking about to begin with, right? If you've got that top-notch student that's always been inquisitive, always landed on their feet, could do anything, put their mind to anything and just do it. I mean, they're going to be fine no matter what they do.
They're going to be fine.
Exactly. Not much to worry about if they pick the wrong major, pick the wrong school, right? They'll figure it out. They'll go back and get a second degree or a master's or whatever. They'll just, they're going to be fine. On the flip side, I think there's that group at the bottom who are going to struggle no matter what they do. And I think realistically, it's finding that group in the middle of, is it worth it to go to, and again, I'm not to denigrate, but is it worth it to go to a 3rd-tier school to get African studies? And then what, right? I mean, again, and there's all kinds of jokes about that, right? Of, again, the hardcore scientists and stuff laugh at the liberal artists. The liberal artists tease the hardcore scientists. And I mean, there's certainly room for everybody, but I think that dose of reality that parents are dealing with of, you need to find a career path and that type of thing. Can you speak? Is there any studies or what's your opinions on kind of that struggling middle group of, I'm not going to go excel at the top college. I'm going to get solid B's and C's at a 2nd or 3rd tier school. Is that a good idea? Bad idea?
For those students, I think where it's possible, if you can pick a place where you're going to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, there's benefit to that, right? Like you want to be at the place where you can maximally excel, if you will, and even distinguish yourself. Because so much what we see over and over again of this sort of college into career chase is who you know. It's building a social network and social capital of people that are going to get you opportunities to land that first job and so forth, rather than what you know, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And how do you meet those people? You stand out some way, whether it's through your extracurriculars, whether it's through getting a great mentor that's someone you meet at an internship at a college, a professor, whatever it is, an alum. So pick a place where you can sort of be a big fish in a metaphorically, if you will, small pond. That doesn't necessarily mean a small college, but a place where you can stand out, I think is more important at that point than anything else, because what we consistently see is like there are people who do great from all sorts of schools and all sorts of majors, but it's not uniform, right? The people at the top end of the spectrum. So what you do during school will matter if you're in that middle bunch and making the right connections and so forth. And so I would put personally a lot of focus on how do I get in the networks and the groups where I can meet people who are going to expose me to jobs I wouldn't have otherwise known and help me land that first job. And, there's that whole wrestling you mentioned about the science, engineering, business versus sort of liberal arts and humanities. And it's interesting. The data sort of suggests that in the first few years after graduating, the scientists and the engineers, they do a heck of a lot bear.
Mm-hmm.
And then they sort of plateau a little bit because to
the
sort of stay up with their
become
fields,
their boss.
Right, exactly. You sort of have to keep studying and staying up and getting new skills. And some of them go back to get business, MBA degrees because they realize that they need to manage people if they want to excel.
Right.
Whereas to your point, the liberal arts folks come out, first few years often don't look that great. They take that sort of lower end, lower salary job, but their skills are more durable typically. If they make the right relationships and connections, then you start to see the growth. And so there's trade-offs in both of these decisions. My advice to the parents is really think about where your situation is and don't read into any of these studies or statistics with sort of a one-size-fits-all lens, because it's going to be highly specific to your condition and the people. Frankly, some of these families, like they know a lot of interesting people to introduce their kids to too,
right,
which can compensate for some of these questions.
Absolutely. Right. And I think that's one of the documented advantages to the well-connected family compared to the struggling families, where just those connections alone are not, it's hard to measure them and so forth, but there's an obvious benefit to them.
Yep, I think that's right. And look, and I'll just add one cautionary note on the really high achieving student, which is in the book, we give sort of a flavor of the what color is your parachute 7-petal diagram to help you think through what is best for you and optimizing on, and just making sure you don't bite off more than you can chew. We tell the story of a student who she was a great ice hockey player and she got into the honors college in her state, state flagship university. And she did both. And like, it was just totally overwhelming and like living two parallel identities that she didn't want to sort of have meet in the middle. And it became too much and she dropped out, and she did fine is the other end of the story. She transferred to another school and did great. Some of those little things, if you figure out what's really driving you, can help you just optimize that search a little bit more on the front end. It's not overly scientific. It just takes a little bit of time up front.
Right. Absolutely. So is this a book that parents should be reading or students should be reading, or how does that challenge? I mean, can you speak to that challenge a little bit of, I shouldn't pick my student's major. I would say I can't pick it, but no, maybe I shouldn't pick it is the right way to say it. Because I think a lot of parents might pick their student's major. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think totally, 100%. I think this is a book where I expect that parents will definitely get something out of it. I would love it if students read it, but I'm not naive, is what I would say. And there are cartoons in the back to sort of do role playing for parents about some of the conversations they might have about these very topics with their kids. And, one of them is very much where the parent is trying to sort of say, I know what's best for you. You should do this school or this major, and talking about how to resist that urge and really coax your child to make those decisions, or perhaps have conversations with a neighbor or a trusted other parent that's in your network, because we also talk about what's known as the parent discount, that what you say to your teenager is likely to be discounted in many cases, or they're going to feel some sort of pressure that's not healthy and cause them to do something suboptimal.
Right. Absolutely. So I think spending the time and effort up front, again, can increase your odds of avoiding dropping out or changing schools or changing majors. Certainly no guarantee. And, some people are just going to have to do it anyway. But I guess, how would you recommend families kind of think through that as far as when do we start and how do we do it and how much effort do we put into this? Let's put it in context. Let's say we have the really sharp kid that says, I'm good at everything. or could be good at anything, right? I'm a first chair trumpet. I love math. I love science, but it also seems a little limiting. I also like philosophy and stuff. So I know I could be the engineer and make the good money if I wanted, but might get bored with that because philosophy is kind of fun too. And I read a lot, but I like music too. I mean, those types of kids, where do we start there? Any thoughts?
Yeah, from my perspective, you want them to go to a school where they can find themselves, right? That's not going to artificially limit the opportunities before they've had the opportunity to dip their toe in the water and find out who's your crew, right? And so I would say going to a school where they're going to make it, you declare that major on the application and be super restrictive about your possibility of switching because they view it as a totally different school. That's probably not the right fit. That's not where this child is. Like they're clearly, the kid's clearly saying, I'm not sure. I have a lot of different interests. I like a lot of different things. I want to experiment a little bit, have a little bit of fun and learn about myself. So go to a school that allows them to have that experimentation, maybe one that allows you to declare your major after your sophomore year, for example. That might be something you even search on and rule out schools that are going to force that very quick choice so that they have some opportunities to experiment and dance around a little bit and sort of learn who's their tribe, if you will.
Right. All right. So the next example would be the student that's, again, the strong B+ student, good academically, that type of thing. And maybe we're in the situation of, mom and dad really want me to choose accounting or engineering but my passion is psychology, I think. And I'm not going to get into a top school. And I certainly don't think I want to go on for more than 4 years. I'm not chasing a PhD for sure. At least that's what I feel now as a 17-year-old.
Right.
Do I go get the training that gives me the job? If I go do elementary ed, I know where I'm going next. If I go do accounting, I know where I'm going next. But if I go do sociology or psychology or something, I
no clue.
As a student, as a typical 17-year-old, I have no idea what the next stop is.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. And I love pointing out to people, McKinsey, the world-renowned consulting firm, hires a disproportionate amount of philosophy majors, which I suspect when they declare their major as philosophy, they weren't thinking of McKinsey on the front end. So you just never know on these things. But, for that student, I would resist strongly getting on a track that's not their passion, because if they're listless and not inspired by it, you see a lot of times where that goes, or it's something that like they might wake up as an accountant, 5 years from now and have this miserable experience where, to your point earlier, let's get them some reps of some different career pathways and opportunities so that they can start to have some zigging and zagging earlier, frankly, in their life and figure out, is this something I want to do or not, right? And so in my mind, there you're picking a school, perhaps staying in state, one that has maybe more support around students, really values that undergrad experience, some good career counseling up front to really help that student be thinking, as I'm picking classes, what am I trying to learn about myself at each step of the way? And what jobs might I try out during the summer? I mean, the other piece, by the way, you didn't say, but is implicit in something you said earlier, which is not only are students not making $20,000, $40,000, $60,000 in the summers, but we have the lowest teenage participation rate in the workforce as temporary jobs or full-time jobs in our nation's history right now. So a lot of teenagers don't even get work experience while they're in high school or their early years of college. I think that's a mistake. Like, get people in the workforce holding jobs so that they can start to learn, like, what do they like and not like about it and gain some experience around that. And so there are colleges that are actually pretty good at doing that. I'll give one example. If you're in the state of Maryland, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, that's not the flagship campus, right? College Park is. But Baltimore County, really good at helping create opportunities for students as young as freshmen to get into the labs with the researchers, get internships with Northrop Grumman, with the NSA, with places like that, to start figuring out what do I like and not like. And the graduation rate there is like just gone straight up through the roof, even though, their students are not like the top right scholars in Maryland. It's the next group of people that do really well because it's a supportive environment.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's getting out there and getting out some experience and just trying things. And then if we get down to the last thing that I occasionally run into parents, and usually it's because they have multiple kids and They have this dichotomy problem of one of my kids is, a go-getter and going to go off to college and do great. But my next one, I was just like, it doesn't seem like it's the right path. I'm a little worried that maybe they're not going to stick with it. I'm afraid they're going to be maybe as soon as freshman, first semester, they might be home in 6 weeks, or they might be home in 6 months, or they might take them 2 or 3 years and they may still bail. Just don't have a lot of confidence that college is going to be successful for them. How do we deal with that type of situation?
And we spent a lot of time on this in the book. For that student, this is your gap year student, right? And put some serious bounds on the experience. This isn't like backpacking in Europe for 12 months. Like, have them get a series of jobs, have them have a set of maybe volunteer experiences. Maybe they're taking some classes at the local college or online or something like that. It's interesting right now because undergraduate experience coming out of the pandemic, increasingly there are colleges that offer more online options, but more just like as a way for them to build a deeper sense of like, who are they? What excites them? And then they can go to college in a year or two. And again, bound the experience. This shouldn't be financed by mom and dad indefinitely, but they'll sort of build some intrinsic motivation, like some desires of like, I want to go do X. And then oftentimes what we see is, well, if you want to go do X, it turns out you got to have your bachelor's degree in such a subject, or you got to get certified or pass this particular certification or licensure, right? To be able to do that. And so it'll create a much deeper sense of what do they need to do to get to a goal that they can start to identify. Basically get them out in the real world and actually having some real experiences. And there are a lot of different ways to do that now. There are gap year programs that are curated and help you have those experiences themselves that are really informative and a heck of a lot of fun. You can piece it together yourself, but spend a little bit of time and don't push college if that doesn't feel like it's the right next step, because it doesn't mean it won't ever be the right next step for that student.
Right, exactly. I actually had a student this past year. She's a very strong student. She got accepted to some pretty high-end schools and so forth. But because of COVID and so forth, she just decided a gap year was a better choice for her. And she literally pieced it together herself. And during COVID, she actually found paid work. She was in some of the national parks, paid help, building trails and doing some physical labor and other types of programs. And a lot of it was an 8-week stint here and a 12-week stint there and obviously there's, again, the go-getter types of kids out there that are going to figure it out and set that up. And sometimes maybe parents will have to help in order to make it successful, where they'd be happy to take whatever opportunities are found, but they're not likely to go look for them without the parents coaching them or maybe doing all the hard work and saying, hey, look at this.
It's a teachable moment is what I would say, right? And you put some boundaries, put some clear guidelines of what you will and won't allow, and figure out the right level of coaching that you need to make sure your kid finds some productive opportunities. But what you described, I think, is exactly right. Like 8, 12-week sprints, right? Like where you're getting some experiences, making some money, which feels good. Start to take on some little bit more responsibility over the course of that, and then make some decisions at the end and evaluate what's right for you for the next step.
Right. So, all right. Well, this has been very informative. I know you've worked hard. You got another book coming. And obviously, just to reiterate, so the book we've just been talking about is called Choosing College. And we'll put all that information in the show notes, links to Amazon, et cetera, so you can get to the book. And this is episode 143 for the show notes. But what else do you have coming down the pipe here?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So writing a new book called From Reopen to Reinvent. So it's what should K-12 schools look like as we come out of the pandemic and not just rush back to the I would say flawed beforehand, but even more imperfect for the current moment system that we had. And what should they really look like? That's a big push that'll come out in July.
Right. Well, great. I really appreciate your time and all this great information. If people want to reach out, is there any other, you have newsletters? I think there's something on a website I saw where you can take a survey. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if people want to figure out what job are they in, you can go to choosing.college. There's a free survey tool there. You can find me at michaelbhorn.com or my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education, Michael B. Horn. And I'm on Twitter at Michael B. Horn. So a lot of Michael B. Horns there typically will end up with me.
All right. Great. Well, I appreciate it. And we'll stay in touch.
Hey, Brad, thanks so much.
That was a great interview. Hopefully you learned a ton. Stick around. We're going to do Brad Recommends next, where we're going to talk a little bit more about gap years and other tools we can use to solve some of the problems that Michael and I have just been talking about. Before we jump into that, I'd like to let you know that show notes are available, as always, at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/143. And on that webpage will be all the links and so forth that we just talked about that can help you get to where you need to go. So if you're driving or whatever and you weren't able to write things down, you certainly can go to the webpage there and get more information. All right, let's go ahead and jump into Brad Recommends.
The latest tips, tricks, and tools you can use today. This is Brad Recommends on Taming the High Cost of College.
Today, I'm recommending that you go back and listen to some prior episodes. In this episode, we talked a lot about gap years and how to find your path in college and whether or not college is even a good fit. If you go back in some of our previous episodes, episode 131 as an example, Gap Years with Holly Bull, that episode we obviously talk about gap years and how to schedule one and how to put it together. We also talk about a gap semester or even a gap summer where you can do things that aren't necessarily an entire year long. And then episodes 130 and 140 are both about finding a career path that fits well with your student. So the first one, 130, we've got College Flight Plan with Greg and Beth Langston. And 140, we have Kristen Clark. And both of these episodes, again, are all about choosing a path. And both of these companies offer some great courses and also have one-on-one consulting. So if you're interested in learning more about the process, you can check both of those podcasts out and then ultimately go to their websites as well. All right, that's all we have for today. I appreciate you listening. As always, we appreciate reviews at Apple or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever else you might be getting this podcast. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns two companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.